My next guests are Tim Cusack and Vince Bustamante. Tim has more than 30 years of experience as an educator and naval warfare officer with the Royal Canadian Navy Reserve and currently serves as Dean of Education at Concordia University of Edmonton. Vince is an instructional coach, curriculum content developer, and author who resides in Calgary. He has co-authored two best-selling books with Corwin, Great Teaching by Design, and the Assessment Playbook for Distance and Blended Learning. Well, welcome to the podcast, Tim and Vince.
Thanks, Dana. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us. We're really looking forward to the conversation.
So I'll start off with the trench story. Tell me about a time you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out. We'll start off with you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So I think for me, when I was in the trenches, I had just taken on a new role as the deputy chief superintendent in charge of all the leadership development for a school district, 100 schools, 100 principals, 150 assistant principals. And I was more focused on working with the assistant principals because they were telling me that they didn't feel as valued or as recognized or as seen in terms of their professional development. So that was my problem of practice is how might I more intentionally serve the professional learning needs and leadership development of 150 assistant principals. So I really had to dig deep, and was working with Vince and others that brought me to the understanding of how to raise the level of development for assistant principals. So really it was getting out of the trench to just to bracket and understand where I'm at in terms of serving and supporting and helping the people that I was serving.
And how about you, Vince? What was your trench story?
One of my trench stories, I would say, is when I took on the role of our social studies department chair, department head is what we call them here in Canada. And I assumed the role via interview and beat out the incumbent who had been there for quite some time, and simultaneously was younger than what you would say the average department head would look like, I guess you could say, stereotypically. And it was really important for me to ensure that the department knew that just because I had beat out the incumbent, that I wasn't going to steamroll them with all these new ideas. I wanted to spend some time figuring out what was the best practice for our department, aligning that with our school goals, and really making sure that as I assumed this leadership position, that I wasn't looked at stereotypically as being the young guy who just was trying to claw his way to the top. Rather, I wanted to make sure that I had the best interests of our department at heart, and for success, for our kids, our student success, and for the success of our grade 7 to 12 social studies teachers.
Yeah, and that's really important to point out. I've been in that role myself a few times, and especially if you're new in the building, or they had a beloved previous somebody in that role, right? But really taking the time to figure out how you can best support their curriculum and planning, and just the dynamics of the department. So thank you. So I brought you both on to talk about your new book, which you co-authored, which is called Leader Ready: 4 Pathways to Prepare Aspiring School Leaders. So let's first of all talk about what led you to collaborate. You do go back quite a ways, and you worked together at some point.
Yeah, so I happened to be the principal of a junior senior high school, and Vince was a social studies teacher. And I had the opportunity to observe his classrooms and really enjoyed how engaged his lessons were, and his instructional leadership working with the students. And he was working on a project that involved mastery learning syllabi. And so tapped him on the shoulder and said, let's expand this within the school. And soon enough, other schools were saying, well, what's this all about? So he and I were going out and sharing the work with other schools, and had an opportunity when I moved into more of a central leadership role. We needed a social studies consultant for the division. And so I tapped Vince to apply, and he was a successful candidate. So we had worked together in the high school and junior high for several years, and then in the central office for the better part of 5 years together.
And go ahead, Vince.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, we've known each other. We've worked in some capacity maybe aside from 1 year when Tim had moved on to a more senior role, for the better part of a decade, quite closely on different projects. And as our projects have kind of increased in scope, we've kind of maintained that same positive working relationship, mentor mentee, and it's been a great catalyst for some of the work that we've put out to the public, for sure.
So when you were working on this project, you told me in the pre-chat you needed a methodology that was scalable for the teachers, not only people that want to go into school leadership. So what kind of research did you do around that, especially as you, Vince, have been working more of in a teacher leader role in the past?
Yeah, so I'll start kind of with the overview of what the book is, and then I'll turn it over to Tim, because the book is really based on Tim's ed doctorate research. So the premise of the book is seeking out aspiring leadership candidates or leaders who may not know they're ready for a leadership role officially, seeking them out and kind of being more deliberate in their preparation, so that when they are ready, or when they think they're ready, or you think they're ready to assume control of an assistant principalship role or a principalship role, that we've had that preparation. And so when we talk about being deliberate in the development of our leaders to make them leader ready, the book does talk about kind of the 4 components of that development, which is understanding your leadership standards, the leader themselves creating a culture for implementation, establishing guided leadership experiences, and then celebrating those mastery experiences. So those 4 pieces, puzzle pieces, kind of work hand in hand. And I'm sure we'll get into them a little bit more later. But basically, my perspective, which you raise a really good point, is I was from that aspiring leader standpoint. I didn't know if I was ready. And it took someone like Tim. In this case, it was Tim, but it took someone who is in Tim's more senior role to tap me on the shoulder and say, I think you're ready for this, whether you think you're ready or not. And so that's kind of where the book comes from, but it was entirely based on Tim's research, which I'll let him kind of talk about as well.
Yeah, so for me, I was working on my doctorate, and because I was in a new role, centrally looking at leadership development of aspiring leaders and current principals and assistant principals, I really wanted to hear the authentic voice of our aspiring leaders. So from a systems level, not to presume to know what they should be getting, but more asking, what do you think would be helpful? What do you think would be important in your professional development? And we looked at the last 50 years of research that really suggested that more needed to be done for our assistant principals and those aspiring leaders, that there's a lot of information about principalship and how to be a good principal, but not necessarily enough of the how to, or how we might better prepare these aspiring leaders to contemplate coming into principalship, because we know we're in a time when we really need more people to want to step into school leadership roles. And Vince and I talked a lot about, well, how can we do this more intentionally, where it's not just the theory, but we're actually rolling up our sleeves and giving current principals and district leaders a suite of tools and strategies to engage with their aspiring leaders and really get a sense of where are they, where do we need them to be, and how do we work collaboratively with them to get them where we want them to be.
Yeah, it seems like you said, that a lot of the prep is focused on the principalship itself, but actually having the APs be able to prepare for the principalship, but knowing how to be successful in the AP job as well. You want it to be more intentional, to find practical ways for them to achieve success, and also self-efficacy. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an important point. And certainly I think it's because I had such a strong relationship with Vince in terms of watching him grow professionally and personally. We kind of talked about, what do you think would be important, or what's going to be helpful to you? So we used Bandura's social cognitive learning theory as a framework, where really we want to understand that affective state. Where are our people at? How are we encountering and meeting them? What makes them happy, sad, anxious, nervous? really understand them as a person, and then really into that social persuasion of what kinds of conversations and how can we talk about where we see you being and how do you feel about that, to some guided learning. So building them a suite of knowledge, understanding, skills that they should be able to do and understand, and really give them a broader, more harmonized, systematic approach to experiences, not just leaving it to a principle and hope that they're getting what they need, but being really intentional in here's what we feel is going to be helpful, but also aspiring leaders, what else do you think would be helpful? And we soon came to realize that this isn't only something for developing assistant principals into principalship. We quickly came to realize that if you are a lead teacher, a coach, a consultant, one of those official or unofficial school leader roles as a teacher, then this book would be helpful in giving you a set of skills and knowledge that can help you progress along that pathway towards principalship.
Yeah, because not everybody takes that straight and narrow road being a dean and AP. They might work at the district office or something and then become principal afterwards. So so talk about one of the 4 pillars. We're not going to give away everything that's in the book, but if you either of you would like to talk about one of the 4 pillars and how people that are training these up and coming leaders can rely on that pillar.
Sure. So the one that we'll talk about, or the one that is called creating that culture for implementation, and it's kind of like a nice segue from what Tim was talking about. There's lots of these. It's almost like when you come out of when you're first starting in the classroom, everything here is very linear. You spend X amount of years in the classroom, and then you just magically, with the magic wand, you're all of a sudden an AP if you want to be, and then after X amount of years of AP, you become principal, and then there's just kind of that one path or one pipeline straight through. And we didn't really just subscribe to that in the sense of exactly what you said. There's other alternative pathways to the leadership title of principal. You can spend some time in your district office. So one of the aspects of creating the culture is figuring out within your school site, who are those talented people. I think too frequently we will shop outside of our district and bring in new leaders, or we're willing to kind of look upstream. Who are those rising stars 5 years into their career? Who are those instructional coaches within our schools that are taking on more responsibilities? And are we tapping them on the shoulder first to say, hey, how do you feel about leadership? And what is your what is your disposition towards it? And then how can I, as the principal, help grow that capacity within you? So we borrow from John Hattie's Skill, Will, and Thrill. So the skill, will, and thrill of our learners is what John Hattie talks about. And we took that and expanded it to what is the skill, will, and thrill of your people. So what is their prior knowledge? What are towards leadership? And that's becoming more prevalent now with a lot of second career teachers. So someone who may be early 40s, went back to school. What did they do in their previous line of work? It's very possible that they might have been in some sort of managerial or leadership role, and we shouldn't discount that because that's significant. So that would be their skill. The will, or what are their dispositions towards leadership? So what skills do they have in terms of, or what dispositions do they have towards leadership? And then lastly, the thrill, or the motivation. What are their motivations towards leadership? And in the motivation case for the cultural piece, we have both ends of the spectrum. We will have overzealous people who want to jump into leadership immediately, but we may need to slow that process down a little bit. Simultaneously, we may have people who don't know that they're motivated for a leadership role. And that was kind of my case. Like Tim was like, I think you would be good in this department head role, or I think you should apply for the department head role because you would fit. And it didn't even cross my mind that I was ready for it yet. I felt like I was too young, and he noticed that. But that doesn't happen if a leader doesn't take time to determine and discover who the people in their building are. Oftentimes those people, if they feel not seen or not spoken to, will seek those experiences elsewhere. And sometimes before we know it, we've lost a really great candidate from our school. So the cultural piece within this book, or the cultural pathway, is more robust than that, but that's kind of the key linchpin of that whole chapter is who are your leaders, what's their skill, will, and thrill, and what are we doing to create an opportunity for them to kind of dip their toe into some leadership experiences.
Yeah, and I would add to that, one of the things we were very intentional about was really giving not only a principal who might be serving as a mentor via this text, or a systems leader who's looking at bringing in some PD to work with their aspiring leaders, but really to give practical tools on how to discover the feel of that environment, how to engage in active listening. My project stemmed from listening to what assistant principals said would be helpful or important, and really leveraging feedback and tailoring feedback to the individual. As Vince said, we often don't give enough credence to prior experience that our teachers have coming into the classroom. And we know that teachers are leaders of learning. They are instructional leaders. And I think shining some of our leadership standards on our teachers is an important focal point for systems leaders to consider.
Yeah, it's really important to see what kind of talent we have from within a lot of the times, and just being deliberate and preparing some of these candidates once we've tapped them on the shoulder. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work both of you are doing with school leaders in Alberta, and you have some teacher and leader ready quality standards that you're working on. We'll start off with Tim, what's happening really within the province. In terms of teacher certification, you're also working on emergency certification because you're also experiencing teacher shortages in Canada. So it's not just in the US. So tell me a little bit about what that is looking like.
Yeah, so we're hearing it across Canada, the States, different parts of the world, the need to attract more people into the teaching profession itself. And so as a Dean of Education here at Concordia University in Edmonton, we're really trying to cast the wider net of looking at what some of those traditional barriers are. And so there's an element of wanting to reclaim and reframe the narrative of what it means to be a teacher today. And so really it speaks to the heart matter of the noble profession and the opportunity to intersect with children and touch lives, and to to beyond a curriculum, to really look at supporting building the greater good for society. But we also know we're up against challenges of legislation and regulation, and particularly in our rural areas where younger people new to the profession might not necessarily want to go further afield. So how do we change the narrative to say, instead of you have to do this, you get to do this? And so certainly there were elements in the framework that we used in Leader Ready that are directly applicable to teachers and those aspiring teachers, people who want to come into the profession. And so this has really precipitated 2 new book projects that we're working on, and I'll ask Vince to share aspects of those.
Yeah, so it was funny when Tim is a bigger Star Wars fan than I am. I'm still a Star Wars fan, but when we came out with this idea to write Leader Ready, it was kind of like, okay, we're gonna write like Star Wars, we're gonna release the one first, and then in a 5-year plan or 10-year plan, we'll look at kind of bulking on it either side. So the Leader Ready book specifically is targeted towards developing leaders and finding those leaders and developing them. And so now we're in the process of kind of writing the prequels to it, which is we're going to have a double header simultaneously kind of being released May of next year on developing new teachers. So there's going to be there will be a book specifically targeted for new teachers. So first day, first week, first year, first 3 years is tough. Here's a handbook intended with strategies to help you out. And then simultaneously with that, we are also releasing a book for mentors, not mentors in all capacities, whether you're a mentor teacher for a student teacher, whether you're an induction coach, whether you are, you're gifted a brand new teacher who's working across the hall, and just by circumstance, you have entered into this informal mentorship piece. And those books are intended to work hand in hand together to continue to be more deliberate on developing those talents early. And in many cases, just like it is for leaders, it's, I'm going to lead the way I was led, or I'm going to teach the way my favorite teacher taught me. And that may not be the best scenario for our students. So having opportunities for our mentors to have conversations with our new teachers in a safe space, using this text as a guide that's where we're currently focusing our efforts. And I will say that the mentorship book specifically will have a similar feel and taste to Leader Ready, in the sense that the goal is, once we finish that and you decide to move into leadership, you can hold on to Leader Ready. And then when the time comes, we'll write the third part of the trilogy to Star Wars on the other side of Leader Ready, which may be systems type leadership, which Tim has much more experience with than I do, obviously.
You have many ideas, Tim, about what that might be entailing, or you're just working on this second book first?
Yeah, so it's simultaneous build, so we're writing on both projects.
Okay.
And so it's great because a little cognitive dissonance. We get to work with the beginning early career teachers, and then with the current we say veteran teachers. So any teacher with more than 5 years of experience, who, as Vince said, you're either an informal or a formal mentor. So we're wanting to work at a school level. So the new teacher coming into your school community, how do you more collaboratively and intentionally welcome them, and beyond onboarding, beyond induction, really have them connect with that school culture, that school community? We talk about the attractions issue of getting teachers into the profession, but I think the greater problem is more of a retention issue. So they come, they try for a couple of years, and maybe they're getting that assignment that's the dog's breakfast, or a most difficult class, or a combined grades, where we're talking about creating conditions to help new teachers flourish and want to stay. And I think that's where we're really shining some extra light and attention. Is we've got one book that you're the new teacher. How do you engage with the school community that you're working in? And the other is the other hand in the handshake. You are the community welcoming this new teacher. So we're providing practical guided examples, some scenarios, case studies, how to have conversations, icebreakers, starters, really getting to know the person in front of you that you'll be working alongside. And we're actually, the exciting thing for us is we're working on kind of a new mentorship model that approaches 4 different aspects of mentorship, when one of them really focuses on the environmental aspects. Just as Vince shared, chapter 3 from Leader Ready really focuses on building that culture. And so really that is what we're excited most about, is how can we not only attract people into the profession, but be more intentional, and by design, how we're going to retain them, because we need teachers now more than ever.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, you had mentioned in the pre-chat about some of these rural areas in northern Alberta, for example, and we can think of a lot of places around North America where, you might have smaller classes. However, just the resources might be limited in terms of just what the school districts can afford. And what are you doing with some of these superintendents to help them recruit some of these teachers to those rural areas, and maybe also being able to retain the teachers to want to just settle in the communities?
Yeah, and I think you've really framed that well, in terms of, we know our rural areas really sometimes have a challenge of attracting people to their communities and hanging on to them. So one of the things that we've done is through more intentional, from K to 12 and post-secondary, kind of that greater connection between those two often, complementary but kind of siloed organizations. So as Dean of Education, reaching out to the superintendents, particularly in our northern communities here in Alberta, and invited them to come to our career fair, where they had an opportunity to talk to our graduating students to say, have you considered, the opportunity to come teach in the north, or to come to this smaller community, or spend your first 3, 5, 7, 10 years having this wonderful adventure? And what was great is by opening the doors and casting that wider net and showcasing that there are more opportunities. We're situated in a large urban center, and often our students want to kind of teach in their backyard. They want to teach in a local school. But to say, here is a superintendent from Northern Alberta, listen to what she has to say, listen to what he has to say in terms of their need and their opportunity. Myself, I started teaching in a remote town in Northern Alberta for 5 years. Loved it. It was a great way for me to really grow as an emerging teacher, as an early career teacher. And so what happened is one of the superintendents hired 6 of my students on the spot, and they're moving up as a collective, as a small team, as a little security base, so to speak. They have each other, that safety net. And I think that's creative, it's inventive, it is you're building a support group as they set off on their beginning year of teaching starting this September. And how might we do more of that? And I love what Vince said earlier about we sometimes don't appreciate enough the homegrown talent within. So instead of outsourcing, we know the challenges in rural areas. How can we more intentionally cultivate and build that capacity within our own, school jurisdiction? So these are things that really excite us going forward.
And for me too, a lot of my current consulting work is in rural Alaska. So I'm a member of a grant. There's a group of consultants and authors who are working with I think it's 6 rural Alaskan school districts. Each district independently is generally off of a road system. So these are fly in, fly out communities that are seeking a lot of teachers from the lower 48, or teachers from the Philippines, from other countries on J1 visas. And one of the things that we're trying very hard to do is to establish a common shared view and understanding and language around learning. Because oftentimes these school districts, like for example, one of the school districts in Alaska is physically, geographically larger than West Virginia, like school district. And the discrepancy in implementation within that school district is huge. And a lot of it is just because of geographic isolation. So we're trying to let's establish a common understanding of what learning should look like in our district. Let's share the language uniformly across our sites so that if we get someone like Vince, who's never experienced an Alaskan winter before, because generally what happens is they'll fly, like they have teachers from the Carolinas, they have teachers from southern states who want an adventure, and it's definitely an adventure up there. But you fly up there, you have a difficult time adjusting because all you've done has been thrust into a community, and then you leave the community rather than experience other parts of Alaska. And so we're trying to be a little bit more intentional with delivering the message that when you, as a community, as a school, when you are gifted with a new teacher, it's almost more important to get them set up culturally than it is instructionally, rather than put them in because they're a teacher and all classrooms are the same, and we know that they're definitely not. And so that's kind of where some of the work that I've borrowed some of our messages from Leader Ready specifically to lead some of these schools. And Tim and I also had an opportunity to present a series of webinars to the Alaska state administrators earlier this year that focused a lot on let's just all have the same understanding, because I'd rather keep Dana in Alaska. It doesn't matter if you move district to district. I'd rather keep you in the great state of Alaska than have you leave and not come back with some sort of kind of sour taste in your mouth about teaching up north.
Yeah, and I think this is a great opportunity both of you have taken to work with those teachers and districts in those rural areas. But like you said, it's not just the instructional piece. Yes, the students might have different needs in Alaska than they might have in North Carolina. So knowing about our students and trauma-informed practices and all that, but also like helping that individual. Often, especially if they're young and they're coming alone, they're far away from family and friends. How can they thrive? Giving them that opportunity to, find places within the community where they can make connections.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the cultural connection is so significant in the north, and for anyone who's listening who's never been north of Canada or north of the 49th parallel or north of 60, it is a different life up there, and you need the community to thrive. And oftentimes that's just assumed but not deliberately intended when we prepare new teachers. And so I would rather it not be assumed, because assumes means that it's going to happen, and it generally doesn't as well. We make it a part of our school improvement plan.
Yeah, definitely. Tim, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your position. You've mentioned a little bit about your work, what you're doing to retain teachers, but you retired from the superintendency a year ago, and then you have moved into this dean of education position. So, kind of you have a lot more like projects that you're working on, but how is that different working more with the university and the teacher prep students?
For me, that was, I think, the exciting opportunity is I wasn't sure if I was ready to retire from K to 12, but an opportunity presented itself in terms of looking at a very robust teacher preparation program. So it's an after degree here at Concordia University of Edmonton. And I wanted to really take what I had been learning through our research with Leader Ready and thinking about the teacher projects, the two books which we had started talking about a year ago, to have an opportunity to be right at the forefront of teacher preparation and how might we more intentionally prepare our early career teachers, not only for the challenges that are here today, but what else is coming down the road with generative AI, with navigating the challenges and complexities, inclusive education and working with families. So to me, it was a wonderful opportunity to bring the research and the practice together. And I'm very excited to work with my faculty and to work with our sessional staff. Also have a Master's of Educational Leadership program here, where again, we're looking at developing those school leaders who also see the significant importance of that cultural component of really helping society writ large to think about what are we asking of teachers today and how societally are we supporting that important work. And I think there is no greater work than the education of our children and making sure that they're getting quality education to prepare them for their future, and that we need to maybe, park our biases to the side and really get a sense of what they feel is important, and to leave less to chance. You hear the expression, so goes the principal, so goes the school.
Yeah.
We really want to provide a basis of knowledge and understanding and skill for school level leaders, for divisional leaders, and for our early career teachers that is complementary to each other. It builds together. It is not so much in isolation, because it does take that collective endeavor to, I think, really address the challenges we're facing and really build a fulsome and robust educational program today. So I think that's why I raised my hand and said, I would like to be a Dean of Education. I bring, experience having served rural, suburban, urban, elementary, junior high, senior high, departmental leadership, systems leadership, and plus my experience with the military as well in terms of mentoring and working with junior officers and looking at all the many facets of leadership, but not just relegating leadership to a certain few with a formal title like assistant principal or principal, but really dive deep into the classroom and celebrate the leadership that our teachers bring with them each and every day, and just harnessing that potential and putting it to the greatest use possible. I don't know if you can tell I'm a little bit excited about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important to have that passion for tying those all together, like you said, the teacher prep with finding leaders within your staff of those teachers that have been there for a few years, and then also assisting those assistant principals. So as we wrap up, I'd like to ask each of you, what's one thing out of what we've talked about today, or in your work in general, that you'd like listeners to remember? We'll start with you, Vince.
Yeah, so I always try to say it once per podcast, and I haven't said it yet, so I saved it for now. But the one thing that I want our existing leadership to remember is that sometimes it's not just time that amounts to quality leaders.
Mhm.
And we need to change the metric of measurement. So experience plus time in the seat is not as important as quality leadership development. So you can go younger. It may be scary to have a newer teacher or a newer leader that doesn't fit that mold of being a certain age. They've served a decade in the classroom, so they've automatically been granted the keys to the assistant principalship. We don't exist in that community anymore. Like Tim said, 5 years is generally, you're now a veteran teacher, just with the way that some of the teachers are leaving. So we need to be more creative, and we need to break from that traditional viewpoint of leader readiness. It's not just time, it's leadership development, quality leadership development.
Yeah, and for me, I think it is not only just making time, but taking the time to authentically engage with aspiring leaders, to hear what's important to them, to get to know them beyond the educator role solely, and to really find out who they are as a person. And I think that really means that we, as whether we are the principal or the systems leaders, to be more vulnerable and open and transparent in terms of hearing what the aspiring leader or the new teacher thinks would be important to them, and just acting on that voice in some way. It doesn't mean we can do everything that they want or are asking for, but we are moving beyond just presuming to know, hey, this is how I was taught, this is how I was mentored, so that's how I'm going to mentor you. We owe it to our new teachers and aspiring leaders to be better than that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, to look outside the box, not follow that traditional model, especially with the lack of just well-qualified, staff sometimes in the buildings, but finding those people who can really thrive in the leadership role, but be mentored as well along the way. So thank you all so much for being on the podcast. Where can listeners find you? We'll start off with you, Tim, your website and social media links.
So you can find me at www.timothycusack.com and on X at CusackTim.
How about you, Vince?
And for me, you can find me on my website at www.vincebustamante.com and on X at Vince Busta, Busta.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure speaking with both of you about just leader ready and teacher prep and what you're doing to support bringing more teachers and leaders into the profession.
Right. Thank you, Dana. And thank you for all that you're doing to further the conversations about great education and leadership.
Thanks, Dana. We really appreciate it.